Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I thought it would be nice to begin with by spending a little time discussing the significance and the purpose of this ISKCON movement. Srila Prabhupada and his ISKCON are non-different. Also, it's our Golden Jubilee anniversary, our 50-year celebration. So it's a good time to take stock, to gain deeper insight into the history, into the significance, and start to understand the opportunity and the privilege that we have in being able to participate in this wonderful movement. So to begin with, we're actually going to read from Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, text 66, and then we'll then go into the discussion for today. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So chapter 2 is entitled Contents of the Gita Summarized. I'll read the Sanskrit and the translation, and then we can repeat that together. Nasti buddhir ayuktasya, nacha yuktasya bhavana, nacha bhavayata santir asantasya kutashukam. One who is not connected with the Supreme in Krishna consciousness and have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there is no possibility of peace. And how can there be happiness without peace? So we can repeat the translation together. One who is not connected with the Supreme in Krishna consciousness can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there is no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? So purport by Srila Prabhupada. Unless one is in Krishna consciousness, there is no possibility of peace. So it is confirmed in the 5th chapter, text 29, that when one understands that Krishna is the only enjoyer of all the good results of sacrifice and penance, that he is the proprietor of all universal manifestations, and that he is the real friend of all living entities, then only can one have real peace. Therefore, if one is not in Krishna consciousness, there cannot be a final goal for the mind. Disturbance is due to want of an ultimate goal. And when one is certain that Krishna is the enjoyer, the proprietor, and friend of everyone and everything, then one can, with a steady mind, bring about peace. Therefore, one who is engaged without a relationship with Krishna is certainly always in distress and is without peace, however much he may make a show of peace and spiritual advancement in life. Krishna consciousness is a self-manifested peaceful condition which can be achieved only in relationship with Krishna. So, the reason why I wanted us to begin by discussing this verse is that we're all afflicted with a desire for wanting peace. And here Srila Prabhupada is giving us the formula as to how that can be achieved, how that can be realized. And we'll discuss over the next hour and a bit how that practically is manifested, how on the basis of Vedic injunction, as we've just read from Srimad Bhagavad Gita, how that this is actually the only panacea. Any other idea of peace that we may have, and there's many contexts of peace. There could be peace in a global context, peace in the Middle East. There could be peace in our own mind, which is where it needs to begin with. And we see already there's so much, we create so much distraction, so much manifestation of trying to find mechanisms to try and alleviate our anxiety in the absence of peace. Already we spend so much on entertainment and so many things. I was reading recently that it's predicted that in the next 10 years, the virtual reality or augmented reality, so that's, you put on these lenses, it takes you, into an immersive experience, will be a bigger industry in the next 10 years than even the cell phone industry is today. So we're so dissatisfied with our current reality, we're now trying to create parallel realities, but actually that's not where we can get satisfaction. So I wanted to speak just to elaborate on the verse that we've just described, that in the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Lord Chaitanya was such a prominent and preeminent scholar. Of course, he is, his the Supreme Personality of Godhead personified, but he left only eight primary teachings. And in the first verse of those teachings, Lord Chaitanya is making the same point that Srila Prabhupada made in this purport, that actually Krishna consciousness is the only way that we can collectively and individually overcome the challenges that face us. So he says, Cheto Darpana Marjanam Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam Shreya Kairava Chandrika Vitaranam Vidya Vadu Jivanam Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Patipadam Purnam Rita Swadanam Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam. So what is Lord Chaitanya saying? He's saying, glory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtan movement, which cleanses the heart of the dust accumulated for years. For us, we can understand years is not a few years. It's not I'm going to be 36, it's 35 years. It's years collected over millions, billions of lifetimes that is covering this natural propensity for Krishna consciousness that exists in our heart, and extinguishes the fire of conditional life, of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. So what is this benediction moon? So Lord Chaitanya describes, it is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and it enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. So what is this Krishna Sankirtan? My father was describing after the japa how the significance of chanting the holy name. And this Krishna consciousness movement is meant to propagate the chanting of the holy name all over the world. So if we just think of how deliberate Srila Prabhupada was and the authenticity behind this ISKCON movement, because while ISKCON may be the vehicle and we're celebrating 50 years of ISKCON, it's a timeless tradition that is being carried through this vessel of ISKCON. But even this vessel of ISKCON is not something that's new. It's not just, now we've officially inaugurated 50 years. You can go and see the inauguration document that was lodged with the lawyers in New York. But actually Srila Prabhupada describes, and he writes this in the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam, that our Krishna, he elaborates on the coinage of the phrasing of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And he writes that Krishna consciousness is the translation of a Sanskrit compound called Krishna Bhavanamrita. And he writes that our Krishna consciousness movement is therefore called Krishna Bhavanamrita Sangha, the association of persons who are satisfied purely in thoughts of Krishna. And this Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9. So we can already see that how Krishna consciousness is then fully imbibed by this word Krishna Bhavanamrita. And then we say, okay, so where does international come from? And Srila Prabhupada writes that one who is absorbed in Krishna Bhavanamrita, that he has no material benefits to ask from Krishna. Instead, the person prays to Krishna for the benediction of being able to spread his glories all over the world. So now we can see where international comes from. And if we think, we think international, we may think global. Here Srila Prabhupada is saying the world. So it's not just our earth planet. And that Srila Prabhupada further describes that Krishna consciousness not only gives bliss to the devotees who possess it, but it impels us to give it to others, spreading it all over the world. So this is, the coinage of the word international. And so if we bear this context in mind, it creates a connection to a very important verse in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in the Adilila 16.1, where I'll read the Bengali and then the translation. Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanyam Krishna Bhavam Ritam Hiya Asvadyas Vadayam Bhaktam Prema Diksham Ayikshavad. So this is the translation of that verse. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who personally tasted the nectar of ecstatic love for Krishna, and then instructed his devotees how to taste it. Thus he enlightened them about ecstatic love of Krishna, to initiate them into transcendental knowledge. So here the nature of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's ecstatic love is described, and how he's relishing it and he causes others to relish it. And these devotees who thus receive Krishna Bhavamrita, they both, we discussed how that satisfaction and ecstasy is described both by the recipient and the giver of that. And what's very prominent here as well is that both of these words, Krishna Chaitanya and Krishna Bhavamrita, are both names of Lord Chaitanya. And so we can see that this ISKCON movement is actually the personal manifestation of the mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The other historical progenitor of the word ISKCON is in the Sandarbhas. Srila Jiva Goswami ends the Sandarbha in his conclusion, and in each Sandarbha he describes the Vishva Vaishnava Raja Sabha. And Sabha we know is gathering. And Vishva is, Vishva means the whole world. So again, we can see the whole world, international, Sabha, gathering, and then what is Vaishnava Raja? Who's the king of the Vaishnavas? Is Lord Chaitanya. So we can see how the significance associated just this word ISKCON, this International Society for Krishna Consciousness that Srila Prabhupada has inaugurated, and the special significance that is underlying them. Also, if we understand the construct of the ISKCON organization, if we think of one of the first acts when Srila Prabhupada was in a position to do so, we saw some struggle in obtaining the land, but one of the things Srila Prabhupada wanted to do for ISKCON very early was he procured land in Mayapur. And at the time, what was Mayapur? It was cane fields, it was rice fields. And Srila Prabhupada procured that land, and what did he declare? Srila Prabhupada declared that this Mayapur would be the worldwide headquarters for the International Society for Because at the time there's nothing there, there's just fields, there's not even a telephone pole, there's no buildings. But actually if we understand, and this is described very nicely in the GBC foundational document entitled the founder, Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of ISKCON, which is something that as followers of ISKCON we should all make a point to study very seriously. And then it describes how that Navadvip, that Mayapur present in this planet is the descendant representation of Sridham Navadvip and Sridham Mayapur in the spiritual world. So that's non-different. And if we understand Mayapur to be the headquarters, and if we think of ISKCON, this global organization, and what do we have in each of our, the institution is manifested by way of its temples, its various different entities, and who presides over these? Srila Prabhupada is present in each and every one of the temples. Here we can see Srila Prabhupada on the Vyasasan, Srila Prabhupada on the altar. And so if we think of Srila Prabhupada overseeing the activities in each of the temples, and these temples then connect back. So if you think of like a hub and spoke, these temples all connect back where? Connect back to Sridham Mayapur. That's the headquarters. So the branch naturally connects to the headquarters. And what's there that's now manifesting in the headquarters is the temple of the Vedic planetarium. And what's at the foot of the temple of the Vedic planetarium is a beautiful Pushpa Samadhi for Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada is present in all the temples, connects back to Sridham Mayapur as the headquarters. Srila Prabhupada in the Pushpa Samadhi is presiding over that. And what's being constructed in the temple of the Vedic planetarium? The Vedic planetarium itself, which is based on the journey of Gopkumar, which is described in Brihad Bhagavatamrita of Sanatana Goswami, and his journey back to the spiritual world. So there we, as a practicing or as a devotee, as a member of ISKCON, we connect through Srila Prabhupada in our temple. Srila Prabhupada connects us back to the headquarters in Mayapur. And ultimately, when we at the point where we're giving up our life and returning back to, back to Goloka Vrindavan or Navadvip Dham, then Srila Prabhupada is there personally taking us and escorting us through these various layers of the universe back to the lotus feet of Shri Radha and Krishna and Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. So we can see the special significance and benediction that Srila Prabhupada has given us. Also, we discussed that how this ISKCON movement is the personal manifestation of the will and desire of Lord Chaitanya, as it's been elaborated on by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And actually we should also appreciate that what Lord Chaitanya has done is, if we just reflect on Vaishnav history, there's the 4 lines, there's the 4 sampradayas, and whilst they're not incorrect, they're perfectly valid, they're not complete. And Lord Chaitanya completed that and synthesized the 4 Vaishnav sampradayas together by the philosophy of Achintya Veda, Veda Tattva. So even if you see the Chaitanya Math, those of you who have been to Mayapur, the Chaitanya Math that was established by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, around the Math they've got the presiding acharyas of these 4 sampradayas around that. And it's described that how, in the position of Srila Prabhupada as the founder acharya of ISKCON, which is following in the Gaudiya Vaishnav Sampradaya, that the acharya exists both and the institution exists both in the spiritual world and the material manifestation of that. So when Srila Prabhupada said we'll have another ISKCON in the spiritual world, it wasn't just we'll be together and we'll be in the spiritual world. There's actually another ISKCON in the spiritual world, and that's what we can look forward to. So in reflecting then on this great tradition that's now manifested in this ISKCON society, 50 years also gives us the opportunity to reflect back. And one of the mottos of the Global 50 campaign, which we'll start to see, us implementing over the next few weeks and months, the tagline, well, there's 2 taglines. One is the joy of devotion, and we'll discuss that a little bit. The other is 50 years forward. Because we're not a backwards-looking society, we're not a backwards-looking group of devotees, we're looking forward. 50 years, in our journey of 10,000 years it's like half of 1%. So we're really at the real infancy of our journey, but still it's worthwhile reflecting on. So in 50 years, what have been some of the milestones, what have been some of the accomplishments of this ISKCON society? And if we also if you have to juxtaposition that or contrast that with the journey of Srila Prabhupada, which is what's described in the Lilamrta, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. But before Srila Prabhupada left to the West, he had written 3 books. Once he had crafted the vehicle of ISKCON and begun his global preaching movement, in the years that followed, he then translated and completed another 60 books. By the time he'd left India, he had 1 initiated disciple. 14 years later, by the time Srila Prabhupada left the planet, he had over 4,000 initiated disciples. When Srila Prabhupada left India, there was not 1 temple. When Srila Prabhupada, wrapped up his earthly pastimes, there were over 100 temples. So just in such a short space of time, and that was in Srila Prabhupada's lifetime, and then we extend that forward, beyond that into the remaining years that brought us to 50 years of ISKCON. And now, as we, probably the numbers change so frequently because it's such a dynamic movement. But last year, at last count, there were about 667 formal temples that exist, that are affiliated and are part of this ISKCON fabric. That since 1966, over 95,000 devotees have formally taken initiation, so clerical vows, daily practicing of the chanting of the holy name, dedicating themselves to the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada and Sri Radha and Krishna. That there are over 3,600 Namahatas, Bhakti Vriksha groups that exist within this ISKCON family. That 506 million books, this is obviously before now the December book marathon, etc., but 506 million books, this is transcendental literature. The Lord's name, we understand the Lord's name and his form are non-different. So there's 506 million manifestations of the Lord in his books that have been distributed all over the world. There are over 110 vegetarian restaurants that exist in the ISKCON family. There's over 65 ISKCON farms and eco-villages globally. It's estimated, and this is a very difficult number to estimate, so it's probably more of a guesstimate than an estimate, but there's over 9 million people that worship in ISKCON temples around the world. That since ISKCON's inauguration in 1966, there's been over 3 billion plates of prasad or sanctified food that has been distributed. That's 3 billion, not million, like billion. So that's, that's half of our earthly population, or close to half. That every year there's more than 6,000 festivals dedicated to Lord Krishna that are held all over the world. That every week there's approximately 1,000 parties, Harinam parties, that are going out somewhere in the world, some city, some town, that are going out and sharing the glories of the holy name. That every day there's more than 1.2 million meals of prasad that are distributed globally. In India alone, through the midday meal program, there's 1.2 million. In South Africa, we don't have the stats for 2015 yet, we'll get them soon, but in 2014, our Food for Life program across South Africa distributed over, I think it was 3.1 million plates of prasad. That's just in South Africa, and that was in 2014. The numbers increased now in 2015. And Padayatra, which is the devotees going on foot, walking from place to place, town to town. It's estimated that they've walked 260,000 kilometers, visiting 52,000 towns and villages in 110 countries. So this is, in 50 years, in 0.5% of our casting forward to 10,000 years. And the challenge that we have is, so it's 50 years moving, it's 50 years forward, so we don't want to look back. This is very little compared to what we actually want to do, compared to the desire of Srila Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the previous acharyas. But there's a fantastic opportunity. We look even in South Africa. A few years ago there wasn't an ISKCON Sandton, there wasn't an ISKCON Midrand. Now in South Africa there's over 15, or there's about 15 temple centers, from 5-6 centers in Gauteng, Stellenbosch, KZN, East London, Port Elizabeth, etc. I described the stats for Food for Life, where 2014 was 3.1 million, and it's growing in terms of the reach for distribution, as well as the number of centers and kitchens that are being set up. If we think of the number of initiated devotees who have formally taken vows, and there's over 1,500. If we think of the number of people who collectively come and worship at our festivals, at our temples, etc. There's a great success story here in South Africa, as is globally. And one of the key goals of ISKCON 50 is that we've got to develop as a society a better sense of a shared pride of what's collectively been accomplished, and the mission that we collectively carrying forward. So there's a fantastic opportunity for us to build and develop this further. And that's just, I guess in one sense, it's the quantitative aspects. It's the aspects that we actually, you can put a number towards. But actually in many senses, or in many ways, the qualitative aspects are more important. If we think of, part of the tagline for ISKCON 50, for part of what, we actually represent, is what can we give that's of the highest order. And that's actually this joy of devotion. We come here, why do we come here every week, or every program? It's because we're experiencing something. What is it that we're experiencing? It's this joy of devotion, that bhakti being the most sublime method of being able to experience and connect with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the joy of devotion. You can't put a number to how many people have been touched by that, how many people experience that, around our own experience of that. We've discussed a little bit around, some of the benefits, that ISKCON has contributed from a society perspective. Promoting the values of a simple life. We're surrounded by so much materialism. Actually, in Srila Prabhupada, in Lilamrta, one of the chapters is entitled "The War," where it's actually World War II that's taking place at the time, and Srila Prabhupada is he's reaching out to different world leaders, and he's writing to them, to try and take up this Krishna consciousness movement, not as something that's sectarian, but as we've read from Bhagavad Gita, is the only way to attain peace. And Srila Prabhupada contrasts that, we think we've made progress, but actually, whether we're dropping bombs from an aeroplane or we're dropping boulders from a hill, the outcome is still the same. That's not real advancement. And we see today, if we think of America as the pinnacle of economic development, of of material prosperity. The stats will tell you, and these are probably underreported because it's very difficult to put a number to this, but the reported stats are 15% of every American suffers with some kind of mental disorder. So that's, if you, in a group of 100 people, there's 15 people that have declared some kind of disorder. It's not the people who aren't saying anything. So we talk around the need for peace. This is what Krishna consciousness can give us. Because what is Vaikuntha? Vaikuntha means no anxiety. So the opposite of peace, what we want with peace is that there's no anxiety. So we see that, the values of a simple life, of a life based on Krishna consciousness, that these tenets of this ancient wisdom from modern times, that the times maybe, the months now feel like weeks, because we're so caught up in what we do and we lose track of time completely. But actually that's not the goal of life. And Krishna consciousness gives us a very tangible way of being able to represent and present a very prominent and authentic alternative to that. So I then want to discuss a little bit from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta. So it's quite, the chapters that Jayananda Prabhu asked me to cover are quite extensive. So it's 150 pages. So it's not going to be possible to do justice in any way to summarize or even just give some kind of synopsis. But we'll try and we'll go through each of the chapters and we'll read a little bit from each of the chapters because they're very sweet. The whole volume 1 is entitled A Lifetime in Preparation. And I think that's also, can be taken not just as a representation of Srila Prabhupada's journey to that point, but also, for ourselves we should be thinking, so this is this lifetime for us is also our lifetime in preparation. Our lifetime in preparation for what? Well, I think we're all clear on what that is, but we're also going through our own lifetime of preparation. And many of us, have social responsibilities, family responsibilities, economic responsibilities. And we see in the example of Srila Prabhupada that, those were never neglected. But we'll begin with chapter 1, which talks about Srila Prabhupada's childhood. So there's a little caption at the start of each chapter which we'll read, which gives a nice gives some nice insight into the mood of a particular chapter. So this is Srila Prabhupada speaking. We would be sleeping and father would be doing arti. Ding, ding, ding. We would hear the bell and wake up and see him bowing down before Krishna. And in chapter 1, it's a really sweet immersion because into Srila Prabhupada's own personality and pastimes, in the same way that we talk about Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead, but what does as a person mean? It means there's activities, it means there's likes, there's dislikes, there's traits, there's relationships. So Srila Prabhupada and each of us in our own way have the same. We're personal in nature. Even the whole essence of our movement is being able to develop that personal relationship with ourselves, with our spiritual master, and ultimately with Srila Prabhupada and Krishna. Even in the pranam mantras that we chant to Srila Prabhupada, in the second pranam mantra we say Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschachadesha Tarine. So what is that Nirvishesha Sunyavadi? It's impersonalism and voidism. And we see, we'll read on further when we get, when we discuss a little bit further. But in the offering that Srila Prabhupada made to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati on the occasion of Vyasa Puja, he wrote a very famous poem, Adore Ye. And in that there's a couplet which Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was particularly pleased by, where Srila Prabhupada writes that absolute is sentient, thou hast proved. Impersonal calamity thou hast moved. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had requested that be published. And even when guests would come and speak to him, he'd quote this couplet. And we see now in the pranam mantras which we recite to Srila Prabhupada in our offering of arti and our offering of obeisances, these same points of impersonalism and voidism that Srila Prabhupada had glorified his spiritual master around removing, we glorifying our Srila Prabhupada in following the footsteps of his spiritual master and eradicating that in the Western world. And we see very early on that while Srila Prabhupada may have acted like an ordinary child, his destiny was not that of an ordinary person. Even when he was born, his father, well, both his parents were very staunch Vaishnavas. They had an astrologer read his chart, and the astrologer predicted that Srila Prabhupada would do wonderful things, that he'd preach Krishna consciousness all over the Western world and would establish over 100 temples. So it's a very wonderful and poignant memory to and means to further develop and deepen our relationship with Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada talks about his childhood, his growing up, his worship, and every day he and his family, particularly his sister, would go to the Radha Govinda temple, how they'd be absorbed in the worship and meditation, how then Srila Prabhupada then asked his father for his own deities and would then spend so much time dressing the deities, performing arti to the deities, bathing the deities, and practically conducting all the activities that we actually conduct in our temples today, hearing, chanting, worshipping, and in a very innocent, childlike way, how Srila Prabhupada then was conducting the same activities. And the very famous pastime is around the Rath Yatra procession. Srila Prabhupada had heard so much about it, had seen some of it, and wanted to conduct that same Rath Yatra ceremony. And with his father, they went through great lengths in crafting a cart that was very much identical to the carts that Lord Jagannath rode on in Jagannath Puri, down to the horses, the charioteer, the colors around that. Srila Prabhupada was so particular around that. And it wasn't just a one-day festival as we celebrate today, Srila Prabhupada conducted that as a 5-year-old child as an 8-day celebration. And every day they would take the chariot down the street, the whole neighborhood would be engaged in cooking and celebrating. And in that way, Srila Prabhupada engaged everybody from a very young age in deepening their Krishna consciousness. One of the other things that's very important for us to reflect on as a society, it's described that it takes up a village to grow up a child. And for many of us who have children or grown up, ISKCON is part of this village for us. And Srila Prabhupada actually describes, he says, it's verbatim somewhere here, but Srila Prabhupada describes how everything that he learned in Krishna consciousness and that he taught us, he learned from his father, except for 2 things, which he learned from his spiritual master. One was printing, so book publication, and the other was distribution. But everything else in terms of Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada attributed to the way he was brought up and the Vaishnava ideals that his father had brought him up with. And then so it's a very wonderful, very wonderful chapter to read. What's also very prominent is the different relationship that Srila Prabhupada had with his father as well as with his mother, and whilst they both centered on relationships to Krishna, the maternal, the nature of his mother's relationship was so different in how she would do everything to protect him, and she had taken a vow that she would eat with her left hand until one day he would ask her, why are you eating with your left hand? Because she felt that if she did that, it would be a way for her to protect him. So there's all these maternal instincts and different customs and traditions that his mother would do to protect him. And then chapter 2 talks around college, marriage, and Gandhi's movement. And Gandhi's movement is especially, I guess, important for us to reflect on, because we see Srila Prabhupada going through this transition, and it's part of why we read this verse from Bhagavad Gita today, where Srila Prabhupada was challenging, how can Krishna consciousness solve the world's problems? After he had gone through college, his mood was, how can we spread Indian culture, Vaishnava culture, whilst India is not independent? And that was his mood. And it talks in great detail how Srila Prabhupada's mindset then changed. And we see that through the journey of Lilamrta, how that notion that Srila Prabhupada initially had, that there has to be independence, there has to be a more pleasant material or political or economic climate before we're able to take to Krishna consciousness. How that gets disproved in a very prominent way, both in Srila Prabhupada's interaction with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and then later on as India gained independence. And what did that give? It then led to partition. Prior to that, when there was a united India in one sense, it describes how Hindus, Muslims, Christians, they'd all celebrate each other's festivals. There was not this antagonism that sort of exists in the world, or in the political climate today. But the most prominent, aspect, of that is, we see this, how Srila Prabhupada, even though he was going through, his studies, immersed in college, etc., that he never lost sight. He was always fully connected with Krishna, with his Vaishnav tradition and upbringing. And that was always, even though he was studying his diploma or degree, he had never lost sight of what the goal was and why he was doing that. And then chapter 3 is a very, very important chapter. It's entitled "A Very Nice Saintly Person," and this also continues with that same mood of while the Swaraj movement was gaining prominence in there. And that was Srila Prabhupada's mood at the time, Abhay Charan, that how his mentality, how his paradigm changed. And the caption that begins that is actually from the writings of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, where he says, "There has not been, there will not be such benefactors of the highest merit as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees have been. The offer of other benefits is only a deception. It is rather a great harm, whereas the benefit done by him and his followers is the truest and greatest eternal benefit. This benefit is not for one particular country causing mischief to another, but it benefits the whole universe." And so this chapter describes how Srila Prabhupada very reluctantly was dragged to this meeting with this saintly person. And Srila Prabhupada had grown up in an environment where every day his father was hosting 4 or 5 different sadhus of different beliefs, faiths, etc. And Srila Prabhupada had got a little bit disenchanted because he'd seen that they say one thing, they do something else. These are people in the community. The one person he'd seen, he had no occupation, but every morning he'd go and he'd put on his sannyas robes, and then he'd go begging, and he'd go to people's houses, and he'd take charity, and then in the evening he'd take off his robes and he'd do something else. So there's so much, Srila Prabhupada got disenchanted in one sense with, the so-called spiritual, the swamis and spiritual life where, what was happening was a little bit different. So he was very reluctant to then go and meet another swami and say, but I've seen so many. What are they actually offering? So he was very skeptical, and his friend went, really forced him to go. And when he went, and as soon as, because they had grown up in a Vaishnava tradition, they recognized this was a saintly person. He was already speaking, and Srila Prabhupada and his friend then offered full prostrated obeisances. And before they could even get up, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was talking to them. He was saying, "You are educated men. You should be spreading the cult of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu." And Srila Prabhupada, then Abhay Charan was shocked. Like he hadn't even, he had just walked in, he hadn't even finished offering his obeisances, and he's getting instructions that he should preach and spread the cult of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the English language. And Srila Prabhupada then challenged that, how can we spread the cult of Chaitanya whilst we don't have independence? And then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta very expertly refuted his arguments. And that's part of what we just read now around how, it cannot be a material situation. I think it's Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati who said that, politicians may change, but politics will always be there. There's always something. There's never a perfect situation. And at the end of the meeting, Srila Prabhupada describes that I accepted him as my spiritual master immediately, not officially, but in my heart. I was thinking that I had met a very nice, saintly person. And so part of what we read further on in this lifetime of preparation is that was the first instruction that Srila Prabhupada had received from his spiritual master, but he was not in a position to act on that instruction immediately. But he always kept that instruction within his heart. And as you spend time reading the biography of Srila Prabhupada, you then see more and more how everything that he did was guided, and that was his compass, that was his true north, was this instruction of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And then the next chapter describes, is entitled "How Shall I Serve You?" So this is quite a profound chapter, which we really don't have time to do any kind of justice to. But Srila Prabhupada remarks that how he'd never, the only question he had asked of his spiritual master was, "How shall I serve you?" He'd never asked a philosophical question, he'd never asked anything. The only question he'd asked was, "How shall I serve you?" And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's response to that was that, "I have every hope that you can turn yourself into a very good English preacher. If you serve the mission to inculcate the novel impression of Lord Chaitanya's teachings to the people in general, as well as philosophers and religionists." And this instruction is very timely because Srila Prabhupada had written this and got a response, and then 2 weeks later Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had then left this planet, given up his body. So that was the final instruction that Srila Prabhupada had received from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and it was the same instruction that he'd received from the first meeting. And the chapter is very very profound in understanding the mood and the nature of the relationship that Srila Prabhupada had with his spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada actually takes initiation in this chapter. He orchestrates and engineers as many of his business meetings and travels as possible to coincide with where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati would be at a particular time and place. And also there's a very famous pastime prior to that where Srila Prabhupada joined the parikram that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was organized in Vrindavan. And Srila Prabhupada was there just for the one day, and there was an opportunity to go to a temple or hear Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati speak, because it was the last day he was going to be there. So Srila Prabhupada stayed, and he decided to stay and rather hear Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati speak. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati then spoke in great detail around many points, predominantly focused around the nectar of devotion and the instructions of Srila Rupa Goswami. And he spoke for hours and hours, and there were just a handful of devotees that were present. And then slowly, a few excused themselves. We will see to the logistics, we're going to do that. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was still continuing. And then, at the end, Srila Prabhupada or Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati then concluded. But it reinforced so much for Srila Prabhupada around what his mission is, the mood of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the authenticity, and how actually the teachings of Lord Chaitanya are the only ways that that the world could that the world could be saved, and that there could be true Krishna consciousness established. But in that, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati remarked that he had marked out Srila Prabhupada as somebody who likes to hear. And we know hearing is the first step, is the first part of our process. It's Shravanam, so hearing, but it doesn't end with Shravanam. Shravanam is then followed by Kirtanam. So Kirtanam is then the glorification. And while Srila Prabhupada had this propensity for hearing, he imbibed that, but then glorification, this Kirtanam. And he would do that in the same way we do he'd come to the temple, he'd worship, he'd join the arti ceremonies, sometimes he'd speak. But for 50 odd years of his life, predominantly his married life, he was in many ways conducting the same activities that we are. But Srila Prabhupada is still fixed on that goal. And then the next two chapters, one is the war, and it talks about two wars that are taking place. One is World War II. The other is then now Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati has left this planet, and he left the instruction for there to be a governing body commissioner, not that there be one single person who takes the position of Acharya. But immediately after his departure, there was this two factions that had developed. So you got World War II taking place, and then the war within the Gaudiya Math that's also taking place. And in there, I guess the most prominent aspect of this chapter is how Srila Prabhupada started taking this instruction of preaching in the English language so far more seriously. And it's at this point that he inaugurates the Back to Godhead magazine, which we still, many of us still receive and read on a bi-monthly basis. And Srila Prabhupada inaugurated this magazine. It's actually, if we could find, let me see if I can find that. Because in the first edition, or in the first in the first magazine, Srila Prabhupada already starts, and you'll see how his mood and his outlook has changed from one of Gandhiism and looking the Swaraj movement, looking for a material alternative to looking for a spiritual alternative, and how he's fully embodying that. So in the first edition that he had published, and it's the same, Srila Prabhupada personally crafted the logo, so the same logo that we see today with Lord Chaitanya, and the motto of Godhead is light, nescience is darkness, where there is Godhead there is no nescience. And in the first in the first edition, Srila Prabhupada wrote this particular passage, and we'll read it because it's very much connected to the points that we've been discussing today. When man forgets that he is the son of Godhead and identifies himself with the body, then he is in ignorance. He is like a man who is very concerned with the automobile's mechanism, yet with no knowledge of the driver. The defect of present-day civilization is just like that. This is actually the civilization of nescience or illusion, and therefore civilization has been turned into militarization. Everyone is fully concerned with the comforts of the body and everything related with the body, and no one is concerned with the spirit, that with the spirit that moves the body. That although even a boy can realize that the motor car mechanism has little value if there is no driver of the car. This dangerous ignorance of humanity is gross nescience, and has created a dangerous civilization in the form of militarization. This militarization, which in softer language is nationalization, is an external barrier to understanding human relations. There is no meaning in a fight where the parties do fight only for the matter of different colored dresses. There must therefore be an understanding of human relation without any consideration of the bodily designation of colored dresses. Back to Godhead is a feeble attempt by the undersigned, under the direction of His Divine Grace, Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada, the celebrated founder and organizer of the Gaudiya Math activities, just to bring up a real relation of humanity with central relation to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That there is a great and urgent need of literature like this that is keenly felt by the leaders of all countries, and the following statements will help very much in this procedure. And what's very prominent in this chapter is the very deliberate and pointed attempts that Srila Prabhupada makes to reach out to different leaders in different positions, trying to articulate and get them to understand that the problems of the world cannot be solved by a material construct, that it needs a spiritual construct. And it's, and what's interesting is this is not just the mood that Srila Prabhupada is reflecting. In some of the writings that he shares in the initial Back to Godhead magazines, and some of the letters that he had written to the leadership, whether it was to Gandhi or Nehru or different heads of state, etc., Srila Prabhupada very deliberately called out the same plea that's been made by leaders across the world. Srila Prabhupada he quotes the Archbishop of Canterbury, who makes the same points, and I'll read the quote. So this is from the Archbishop of Canterbury. He says, "In every quarter of earth, men long to be delivered from the curse of war, and to find in a world which has regained its peace, respite from the harshness and bitterness of the world they have known till now. But so often they want the kingdom of God without its king. the kingdom of God without God, and they cannot have it. Our resolve must be back to God. We must make plans for the future, for peace among the nations and for civil security at home. But that is quite right enough, and it would be wrong to neglect it. But all our plans will come to shipwreck on the rock of human selfishness unless we turn to God, back to God. That is the chief need of England and every other nation. And Srila Prabhupada calls out all these great leaders, the Archbishop of Canterbury, all the different leaders, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati himself and others who are making the same plea and showing that it's not a sectarian plea, that it's a universal plea, that this has to be conducted. And then we'll end up with the chapter 6, which is entitled An Unknown Friend. And this really comes full circle from chapter 2, where Srila Prabhupada, college, marriage, Gandhiism, and now Srila Prabhupada has penned a letter to Gandhi, who's now India has gained independence, but everything Gandhi had aspired for is not being realized the way that he intended. And Srila Prabhupada is now drawing this back full circle, so he's writing to him this letter penned by an unknown friend and talking to him and writing. So he's effectively articulating how all the ideals that Gandhi had aspired for, which should have been realized on the principles of Bhagavad Gita, how have now been totally contaminated and realized in a completely different context, because it hasn't been seen through on the basis of the Bhagavad Gita. And it's full circle in two parts. So one is, while Srila Prabhupada in his youth was an ardent follower of the movement of Gandhi, he's now gone through the better part of his married life, 40, 50 years, and history has now played out, and we're seeing it's completely different from what was envisaged, and how Srila Prabhupada's firm conviction is that Krishna consciousness is the only solution that can exist in the world. And this is what he's writing to Gandhi. And for us it's also particularly poignant in one sense that Srila Prabhupada is writing this letter and he's penning this as the unknown friend. And later on we see that as Srila Prabhupada established ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada would pen his letters, and what would he end his letters with? He'd write, the ever well wisher. So then this unknown friend for us now is Srila Prabhupada, and he's there as the ever well wisher, as he presiding as the Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He's there as our ever well wisher. Brahmananda Goswami, or Brahmananda Prabhu, who's now left his body, in a letter to him, Srila Prabhupada, it was the first time Srila Prabhupada had used that phrase, your ever well wisher, and he describes that what it must mean to be your ever well wisher, because any of us, we have relationships, we have friends, we have family, etc. But who's there that lifetime after lifetime can be there as your ever well wisher? He says only Srila Prabhupada could be there, because what is he giving us? He's giving us this Krishna consciousness, which is not bound by time and space. It's not bound by this lifetime. Whatever progress we make in spiritual life is not constrained to the realities of time, space, etc. To be, how compassionate must someone be to be your ever well wisher? So this was, the point that Brahmananda Prabhu was making. So just to conclude that, we're now starting a new year. It's a very significant year for us, and many of us in New Year's we make resolutions, and we should consider making resolutions around not just things that we need to do, but things that we need to be. So if we think around the resolutions of the things that we need to be, what are the things that we want to resolve? They're going to bring us closer to that to be that we want for ourselves. So we should reflect on that. There's also many opportunities that will be presenting itself. Many of you already so actively involved in taking a leading role in spreading Krishna consciousness here in Sandton and Gauteng. But there'll be many unique opportunities that will present itself just for this year, that we could do to help inspire ourselves and further our own missionary mood, deepen our own Krishna consciousness. We'll be launching shortly this book club concepts where as devotees we can get together and try and imbibe and further appreciate the mood, the mission of Srila Prabhupada, get together, read the biography of Srila Prabhupada. There's many biographies that all represent, if you look at, we may look at a painting and each of us may see something different in that painting. In the same way, Srila Prabhupada's followers who've had direct association with him, we all glorify and appreciate different qualities of Srila Prabhupada. So there'll be, many opportunities for us to, like we're doing today, glorify Srila Prabhupada, further immerse ourselves into understanding the mood, the mission, the person, who Srila Prabhupada, is. There'll be unique opportunities for us to give and receive Krishna consciousness. Actually, for South Africa, there's a few themes that we're trying to I guess oversee or and realize in the course of this year. And there's three, like in the Nectar of Devotion, there's the concept of waves. We'll formally launch in the next few weeks the 3 waves that we're going to try and try and follow through for our 50th celebration of the Golden Jubilee. The first wave is around celebrating and then informing, and in there's going to be flagship events that we really want to have. There'll be VIP events in Gauteng, in Durban, in Cape Town, etc. We'll invite prominent people. We'll host an event that will commemorate 50 years of ISKCON in a very substantial way. One of the other goals is that we want to try and create a resounding vibration of the holy name. So there's already many different special, unique events that are being planned, and we'll share details on that. Part of what today's program is about is increasing our appreciation for Srila Prabhupada, and there'll be opportunities to do that. We also want to supersize the normal activities that we conduct on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis within ISKCON, and try and increase that further for the pleasure of Srila Prabhupada. There'll be special goals that will be set around increasing book distribution, increasing food for life. We also want to 50thize everything that we do. So our festivals, we want to bring the special. It's a reason to celebrate it. Not that we need a reason to be more joyous, but there is another reason. And we then want to try and increase awareness and appreciation of ISKCON, of Srila Prabhupada, of the movement. And then so that's the first wave. The second wave is really how we create a shared pride in ISKCON amongst ourselves. It's very internally focused, but how we connect better as communities. This pride that we have on bonds on a shared spiritual journey, and this mutual affection that we have for Srila Prabhupada and Shri Radha and Krishna. And the third wave that we want to introduce is around outreach. And how do we introduce new people to Krishna consciousness? That has to be part of what we do as our responsibilities as devotees. So there'll be many wonderful opportunities to deepen our Krishna consciousness, to immerse ourselves further, to deepen the relationships that we have with each other, with Srila Prabhupada, and deepen ultimately our connection to Shri Radha Shama Sundar. So we'll stop there. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki jai.